Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Voted for Donald Trump to, quote, take our country back, lost his campaigns for U.S. Senator and Louisiana Governor in the 1990s, thanks in part to anti-racism activist Tim Wise, who worked for an organization founded for the purpose of defeating Duke. In an epic tweet storm this week, Wise compared the challenges Democrats face now to what they faced when Duke was running for office. And Tim is back with me. Tim, I'm going to read one of these tweets because this was epic. You wrote, people who say that the Dems should ignore Trump's race baiting because it's some genius political strategy calculated to distract us are idiots. He's no genius. And if you downplay it, you normalize him. If you make this about policy, you normalize him. He is a racist. Expand on that and explain, if you were running a campaign against Donald Trump, how you would do it.
Well, I would start by recognizing that Trumpism did not gain steam based on policy. The people who voted for Donald Trump didn't sit down and compare policy positions and 10-point plans. They were responding to the rage that Donald Trump was tapping into. He hates who they hate, and that is why they have stuck with him. I'm talking about the hardcore base. So you're not going to win an election against an emotional movement by just talking about your wonderful plan for this or for that or the other thing. Not that we don't need good plans, but I think the entire campaign of any Democrat needs to be focused on the existential threat that Trumpism poses to the America that we care about and the values that we believe in, which means talking about the way in which this divide and conquer, this bigotry, racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, all of it plays into a politic that doesn't solve our problems, which is intended to distract from those problems. It's the same thing that David Duke tried to do in Louisiana. And the only reason that we were ultimately able to defeat not just Duke the man, but Dukeism, the movement, was by making it a moral crusade, because we had a lot of people on the left, progressives like myself. You had other people that were reasonable Republicans and moderates. They're probably not going to agree on policy. They're not going to agree on tax policy or jobs policy or health care. But one thing we were able to get them to agree on was that there was something fundamentally un-American at the most basic decency level about Dukeism. That's going to have to be the message that's going to unify people, not just simply having really good plans for this or that policy. And I'm afraid that right now, the Democrats are still acting. They're bringing spreadsheets to a gunfight, right? Yeah. They're bringing debate evidence to a gunfight rather than understanding this is about values, the values that we care about as a country, as opposed to the values that Trumpism represents.
And I've talked to you about this before, and I interviewed for my book, and it was great. You are great. Did David Duke run an explicitly racist campaign for governor and senator, or did he try to run on something else?
Oh, it was explicitly racist, but of course he tried to cover that up and make it about, taxes are too high, but he always talked about the reason for that was all the spending we do on, quote unquote, those people. Or he would talk about the fact that unemployment was high for white folks, but the reason was they're taking your job, whether it's immigrants or, black folks because of affirmative action. So it was explicitly racist, and the only way he was defeated ultimately was when we drilled down onto that. We didn't, talk about sidelight issues. Now, the first time, unfortunately, we did. In the U.S. Senate race, those of us in the organization that were fighting him ended up having to sort of go down that road. We had consultants and some conservatives in our own coalition that were afraid to challenge him on his racism. So they said, let's talk about the fact that he paid his taxes late. Or let's talk about the fact that he didn't go to Vietnam. The guy's a Nazi. That's a side issue. You need to focus on what's real and focus people on the moral issue.
What do you think about the people who say the only way to defeat Donald Trump is to pivot off of talking about his racism, pivot off of talking about him at all, and just talk about health care?
I think that's absolutely absurd. No one is sitting around saying, I'm not sure if I'm going to vote this year. And then all of a sudden they're going to get online and look at somebody's 10-point plan for health care and go, oh, well, now I'll do it. That's not to say that we don't need good plans for health care. But that is not what is going to drive people to the polls. It is not what is going to get people excited about this as a moral crusade, where they're actually able to say, in this moment, I stood up and I did something. Donald Trump did not come to power on the basis of policy. Now, his hardcore base, they're not going to move. We know that. David Duke kept 91% of his voters from the Senate race to the governor's race. And the reason for that was very simple. The only way that you could get Duke's people to leave him, or Trump's probably now, is for them to acknowledge they voted for a monster. And nobody wants to do that. So those folks are lost. But those independent voters, of whom there aren't nearly as many as we think, and the progressive base have to be driven to the polls, yes, on the basis of some decent plans and policies, but also on the basis of a values decision. What kind of America do we want to live in? This is an existential threat. It is not a normal campaign. You cannot run against Donald Trump the way you would George W. Bush, by comparing plans and policies, because Trumpism is fundamentally at its root an authoritarian neo-fascist movement rooted in emotion, not logic. You cannot bring that spreadsheet to the gunfight. You cannot treat politics like the debate team when the other side treats it like the cheerleading squad and knows how to get people pumped up for that. So yes, Democrats need plans. I'm not saying they don't, but every time they talk about those, they should filter that back by critiquing the politics of prejudice, which is all Trumpism has ever been about.
It is Monday, the 29th of July of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. That's right, we've had to slice and dice a few things that were left over. Oh, but they are still gourmet dishes beyond compare. Oh, yes. Well, tragedy, comedy, and everything in between obviously took place this weekend. The tragedy part, of course, is the shooting up of the Gilroy Garlic Festival. All right. The right-wingers and gun nuts are already calling it, if they hadn't made it a gun-free zone, if they hadn't tried to wand people were guns, then the guy wouldn't have had to cut through the chain-link fence that was put up in security and come in and shoot a bunch of people and kill a 6-year-old. Yeah, he would have been able, I guess, to just come in through the front gate, since no one was checking now, were they? First time that they ever wanted people check for weapons and even put up a security fence around the event. Why? Because of other shootings around the country. And now it's been visited upon the Gilroy Garlic Festival. One witness did say that, actually, they were hiding. I don't know. Still, I hate saying witness. They're victims in the midst of this. One attendee of the Gilroy Garlic Festival that was hiding heard an exchange between another attendee and the gunman when they screamed, "Why are you doing this?" And the response from the gunman allegedly is, "Because I'm effing angry." I bet. One could say that, if he just had a knife, he would have stabbed some people. Yes, he would have stabbed some people. Now, wouldn't he? They would have been stabbed. I don't think that 60 would be injured. I heard another number, 15, but I've also heard a number from police sources that say 60 were injured, though that's not from the gunfire, so maybe that's where the demarcation is. Only those actually shot are considered to be injured, not those who were trampled afoot or had a heart attack while trying to escape gunfire at the Gilroy Garlic Festival. So, we're going to hear it from the gun nuts that it's liberals' fault. Indeed, it always is. Because if we hadn't triggered that gunman by putting up that security fence, obviously, maybe that's why he was so angry. He expected to be able to walk in through the front gate, no questions asked, and then start shooting people. And then he had to put the effort in to get some cutting tools to cut through the security fence. Maybe that's why he was angry. We had a little soiree here at Positively 3rd and Marie in Rogue River. Yes, indeed, the mothership studio is at Positively 3rd and Marie. Just a little secret. Don't tell anyone. So we had a soiree. We were going to have a garden party, but there's been a massive wildfire in a canyon up the I-5 at a little hamlet called, surprisingly, Canyonville. The hardest conflagrations to extinguish. Anyway, just a little aside, back in the day, I worked for a major oil company in production and exploration, and I had to make money to feed the family, and it wasn't anything that I wanted to do, and my family, I don't know, on their own, unbeknownst to me, because I was going to teach, but I wasn't making any money, and I had a young family with a young child too. So regardless, I was trying to teach and also filling in as an orderly in ICU and ER at St. Jude Hospital in Fullerton. So I kind of fell into this job with Gulf Oil, and I worked on an A-frame truck for about a week, and then I got bumped up to other positions, and eventually I became like a supervisor of sorts. That was the functions of my title as a production operator, So in the progression of being advanced in the jobs, I had to pick up what was known as a red card, and a red card is where you are rated to be able to fight oil, gas, wood, chemical, and electrical fires. Now, one thing I know, and everybody should, is that heat rises. It's weird. It's like physics. Heat rises. And if you were to pinch the exit part of where that heat is rising from, it can do various things. It can act like a jet. Or, if there happens to be a meteorological phenomena in the area called an inversion layer, it can also act as a dome or cap above peaks on a ridge and the canyons below. When I first heard of this fire in Canyonville, it was a relatively small affair, less than 70 acres. Okay, well, fly the air tanker in there, knock it down with a retardant, get another one, do a grid pattern almost as mop-up, and then send in the mop-up crews. What's the problem? But then I became aware of the topography of the land and what had actually happened in this fire. A illegal campfire in a ravine, a very steep and narrow ravine, got out of hand and raced up the canyon walls of this ravine, and that's how the fire took off. To get to the source of this meant that the air tanker not only had to pinpoint drop, but also contend with the rising heat of this fire, in which it was creating a cap, a heat cap, a dome of sorts. So you throw the retardant down, and it just kind of mists off and slides off to the sides and doesn't get down into the canyon. So we have this soiree, going to have a garden party, but because of all the smoke, we decided to come inside. And in previous conversations here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, I've alluded to, some of the more, right-wing tropes and ideas that persist in our little burg here. And the Burgermeisters got very upset when I gave them some facts, which is always considered my opinion. Okay? Doesn't matter how much expertise one would have. Doesn't even mean that if you bring the actual studies from the reputable universities or government agencies, it doesn't matter. The government agencies are part of the deep state, and there's nothing but propaganda taught in the schools anyway. Why would you try to convince me with that? Now, I held a red card when I worked for a major oil company in production and exploration. You would think that would give me just a little bit of expertise, a little bit more than the guy sitting at the end of the bar. You would think. So I explained that we can't blame, the Forest Service or even the hotshots. We can't blame the firefighters for not being able to put out this fire in a timely manner because of the topography of the terrain. And I explained what a heat cap was and what happens when that happens. And when they throw the retardant down, it's just going to slide off. So I walked back and started doing some dishes because, that's what I do. I'm the chef and I like to clean as I go. So I turn around. And the first thing out of one of the guys' mouth says, this whole problem about all these fires is the liberals' fault. They're the ones destroying the environment. They made these laws that they can't use retardant in these air tankers. California has a law. You can't use retardant in these air tankers. And everybody goes, yeah, California sucks and now they're coming up here. And now they're preventing us. Kate Brown said that they can't use retardant. They couldn't use retardant. Oh, my God. So I did not get into it. I ignored it. Let them live in their little world. I mean, please. What is that orange reddish stuff coming out of these air tankers in California and in Oregon? What is that? It's not water. There's so much more to talk about, but we're going to have to get into this curated show here today because we have indeed curated a show for you today here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. And at the top, that was Tim Wise telling folks that Democratic candidates and activists who ignore Trump's racism are bringing spreadsheets to a gunfight. No matter how thick those spreadsheets are, it's not going to win. It's not going to win. On the rest of the menu, a Colorado sheriff slammed Mike Pence for stiffing cops with a huge bill while holding a $700,000 fundraiser, which he raised in an hour. Environmental groups vow to fight on after the Kavanaugh Supreme Court okayed Trump's border wall. Yeah, we'll just take it from environmental groups and give it to the military here. What? That's posse comitatus. That's just a goddamn piece of paper. And Barr's Department of Justice approved the $26 billion T-Mobile merger after the company spent $200,000 at Trump's hotel. After the break, we move to the chef's table where the Singapore Prime Minister's estranged brother has backed the opposition party in a strange election twist. And just jailed Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has developed some convenient allergies after being conveniently poisoned with some convenient chemicals. There's always some kind of convenience that occurs in Vlad's Russia. Conveniently, I might add. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Apologize for the show not being in its usual live period on Friday and only the podcast available. And do pick up those podcasts, please. I got to confess, and I wasn't even waterboarded to do this. We had a technical glitch that prevented me from being able to connect for the show, even though I was able to actually broadcast and put up other files and other show and content. But the confession is that I pushed the wrong button right when it mattered. And to rebuild the broadcaster to accommodate my mess up would have taken too long. So it was much easier just to put, I think I put Sam Cedar in place. I can't remember at this point. So much has happened. Well, we better get on with this because we have really eaten into time. If you were to go to the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the rightish of the page, there with the media scroll, and that would be a social media scroll, is the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Look to the leftish of the page, and our Patreon link is there, and do please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. We are unable to do this without you, and thank you for your generosity. Resistance Radio has been resisting for the last 8 years, 24/7, 365, just as a reminder. Follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, and you'll see that social media scroll at the rightish of the page. Do so by looking up at Netroots Radio, and Tom takes care of that. I take care of at Justice Putnam, and I also post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime, and then put that up on links in social media. If you would like to follow the show, do so at Cookbook West. Pick up podcasts. Those are very important. At Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and really wherever podcasts can be found. All right, let's get into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Oliver Willis out of Share Blue Media brings this to us. Well, the sheriff of Pitkin County, Colorado, is slamming Pence for not paying the $24,000 bill to provide security for him when he came to town for a high-dollar fundraiser. Pence was the star attraction at a fundraiser at the Caribou Club in Aspen, where couples paid $35,000. That's a K with 3 zeros. Couples paid $35,000 each. I would have said $70,000 a couple, just because I like to do that. Well, Pence also spoke to the Republican Governors Association at the St. Regis Aspen Resort. Pitkin County Sheriff Joe DeSalvo told the Aspen Daily News that the police who worked to secure the venue for Pence are owed payment, and he is upset that they haven't received it. Well, get in line! We had a SWAT team from Garfield County here that I want to see get reimbursed. We had Carbondale officers. Actually, why am I giving this guy some sort of weird East Coast accent? He's in the West. We had a SWAT team from Garfield County here that I want to see get reimbursed. We had Carbondale officers here that I want to see get reimbursed. They don't have this kind of money. I don't have this kind of money, he said. At least I said it the way I think that he should say it. DeSalvo said the Pence security detail included 64 police officers for Pence's 20-hour visit. Out of those 64, 14 were state troopers, and we don't have a responsibility to pay them. Should I slip into this weird cowboy accent again? But the 50 other cops that were here are all on the county dime, DeSalvo said. You raise $700,000 in an hour? You should be able to pitch in to support the community that made you feel welcome. Wait a second. I hate to put it to the sheriff, but do you know who you're talking about? Caring about the community that made him feel welcome? He doesn't feel welcome by anybody. He's one of those weird Christians where the whole world's against him. Ask Mother. E.A. Crunden of Think Progress brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Sierra Club and other environmental advocates are vowing to press on with their fight against Trump's efforts to use military funds for a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border following a Supreme Court ruling allowing the project to go forward. Okay, we're talking partisanship now. Talk about activist judges. They're never activists when they do it. And I always want to know why conferring equal rights and due process across a broad spectrum of the population is always worse than giving money to an obvious boondoggle and to appease the addled propecia mind of this rat in the Oval Office. In an unsigned paragraph-long decision, the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 ruling, Kavanaugh, said that Trump could use the $2.5 billion in Pentagon funding for the wall in parts of California, New Mexico, and Arizona. The move stayed a prior lower court decision that ruled in favor of the Sierra Club and other plaintiffs, barring the administration from using the funds for the wall. Well, of course, Trump had to, gloat in between making racist statements about Baltimore. Trump's border wall has long been a source of ire for environmental groups and scientists, many of whom say that the wall will be ecologically devastating and have severe implications for wildlife and biodiversity, in addition to research. Well, the organizations continue to fight that effort, and they will continue to oppose the wall, they say. Well, I will also say that it becoming an ecological disaster with devastating implications for wildlife, biodiversity, and research is all part of the plan. I don't know how many times I will say this, but I'll probably say it a lot. Property is always more valuable when delivered vacant to a hostile foreign power. Oliver Willis also brings us now the last offering in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Boy, influence peddling, bribery, graft. I think those are all under the aegis of impeachment. And I'm not talking high crimes and misdemeanor here. Treason, bribery, and high crimes and misdemeanors. Let's not forget that. The Department of Justice announced on Friday that it has approved T-Mobile's merger with Sprint, valued at over $26 billion. What I like is all of the news clips of the T-Mobile folks in their little pink sweatshirts, pretty much flooding the Trump hotels and, I don't know, trying to influence something. I was trying to figure out what they were trying to influence. The combination would reshape the wireless industry and create a formidable rival to AT&T and Verizon, number 1 and number 2 in the U.S. Approval of the deal comes after T-Mobile executives spent nearly $200,000 at Trump's hotel in Washington, D.C., but they were also there in New York, as they like to say locally. Before announcing the plan to merge with Sprint in April of 2018, T-Mobile executives had only visited the hotel twice. But after the deal was announced, they started booking rooms at least, and I have to put the emphasis on at least, 52 times. Because Trump has refused to separate himself from his private business dealings while in office, he continues to personally profit from the money spent at his hotels. The deal also required the approval of the FCC, which is currently overseen by Trump loyalist Ajit Pai, who has a history of supporting anti-consumer policies. Support for the merger is not, however, universal. T-Mobile and Sprint still face an ongoing lawsuit from 13 state attorneys general and the District of Columbia seeking to block the deal on anti-competitive grounds. The merger would hurt the most vulnerable Californians and result in a compressed market with fewer choices and higher prices, California Attorney General Javier Becerra said in June. The T-Mobile and Sprint merger would not only cause irreparable harm to mobile subscribers nationwide by cutting access to affordable, reliable wireless service for millions of Americans, but would particularly affect lower-income and minority communities in D.C., New York, and urban areas across the country. The Trump administration went ahead with its approval despite the lawsuits because urban, black, poor, brown, who cares? Well, we better get on with our break, and when we get back from that break, we are going to go through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, move over, Jaws. The premise of Crawl may not be that original, but it's nonetheless effective when it comes to generating some genuine thrills and chills. Set in the midst of a Florida hurricane, Crawl centers on a college swimmer, Haley, played by British actress Kaya Scodelario. Against the warnings of everyone, she decides to check in with her father, Dave, who she can't reach, and who seems to have ignored the calls for a mandatory evacuation. After a harrowing trip through the storm, she finds him in the basement of the family home. Unfortunately, however, Dave isn't the only thing trapped in the flooded basement. A group of agitated alligators, escapees from a nearby gator farm, have also decided to make the basement their new home, and Haley must try to rescue her injured dad and herself from both the gators and the rapidly rising waters. Set mainly in this basement, Crawl has a dark and claustrophobic feel to it, which is nearly as scary as the man-eating reptiles. In fact, the basement becomes almost a third main character in the film, and director Alexander Aja makes the most of it. Also, unlike some other killer gator films, these beasts look like the real deal, thanks largely to advanced CGI and some really good models. Still, it's the actors who make the movie work. Scodelario comes across as a tough warrior, while Barry Pepper's Dave plays a dad who, despite experiencing his share of personal disappointments, still has enough life force in him to want to survive and keep his daughter safe. While predictable, Crawl is never boring and brings off jump tricks with the best of them. Comparisons to Jaws, which the director has admitted was an inspiration, are inevitable, but Crawl, with its disciplined, minimalist approach, manages to shine on its own. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. GPS has completely transformed how we get around, but other animals have long had their navigation systems built right in, like ants and bees.
We know that their eyes are quite sensitive to polarized light, and the sky has a particular pattern of polarized light relative to the position of the sun.
Barbara Webb, a bioroboticist at the University of Edinburgh. You can see polarized light firsthand. Take a pair of polarized sunglasses and rotate them against the sky, and the light passing through the lenses changes. Webb says the insects have polarization like that built right into facets of their compound eyes.
You can think of it as the equivalent of having a little polarization directional filter over them, or lots of sunglasses pointing in different directions.
But Webb was curious whether there's really enough information in the sky to give insects a highly accurate sense of direction. So her team built a sensor modeled after a desert ant eye and put it under artificial light meant to simulate the sky. They then fed that sensor input into a computational model meant to mimic the brains of desert ants, crickets, and other insects with a celestial compass. And they found that with the insect's innate sensing and processing equipment, they can likely sense compass direction down to just a couple degrees of error. The results are in the journal PLOS Computational Biology. A system based on that of insects could someday be a cheap, low-energy alternative to GPS.
Insects have very tiny brains, a brain the size of a pinhead that's using hardly any energy, and yet they're still able to navigate, better than we can even with GPS, which is a huge infrastructure.
Webb is now working on building a robot that can, just like the desert ant, use light to get its bearings. Although, after sundown, it may have to ask for directions. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
In the U.S., about 15% of people who have HIV don't know they have it. If you have it, the sooner you get diagnosed, the sooner you can start life-saving treatment. Everyone should get tested at least once, and those at high risk should get tested at least once a year. If you're pregnant or planning to get pregnant, get tested as soon as possible. Healthcare providers, conduct routine testing according to CDC's guidelines. Screen all youth and adults for HIV risk behaviors. Help patients understand their risk and the best prevention options. If people test positive, link them to treatment and prevention counseling quickly. HIV testing is important. Know your HIV status. See your healthcare provider to get tested or find a testing site at gettested.cdc.gov. You can also get a home testing kit online or from a drugstore. To learn more, visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
But Mom!
Don't but Mom me. You heard what the doctor said.
I'm fine. I just got my bell rung. It's not like I blacked out.
You've had headaches, dizzy spells, and you're just not yourself. That's not feeling fine.
Come on, I can't miss the game.
It's still serious, even if you didn't black out. It's better to miss one game than the whole season.
All concussions are serious. Know the warning signs and never let your child return to play before a healthcare professional says it's okay. A message from CDC.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Welcome to Defining Moments in MMWR History. I'm your host, Dr. Sonia Rasmussen, Editor-in-Chief of the MMWR. In early 2015, an outbreak of infections with Zika virus, a flavivirus transmitted by Aedes mosquitoes, was first recognized in northeastern Brazil. By September, a sharp increase in the number of babies born with microcephaly was reported in areas affected by the outbreak. The Brazil Ministry of Health established a task force to investigate the possible association between microcephaly and Zika virus infection during pregnancy. They also established a registry to capture microcephaly cases and pregnancy outcomes among women suspected to have had Zika virus infection during pregnancy. On January 22, 2016, MMWR first published a report on the possible association between Zika virus infection and microcephaly. This was the first of more than 60 MMWR reports on Zika virus, which have provided critical guidance and recommendations for public health practice worldwide. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Peggy Honane, co-lead for the Pregnancy and Birth Effects Task Force for CDC's Zika response. Dr. Honane is an epidemiologist and acting director of the Division of Congenital and Developmental Disorders at CDC. Thank you for joining me today, Peggy.
Thanks for having me, Sonia.
Remind us, what are the signs and symptoms of someone infected with Zika virus?
The most common symptoms of Zika are fever, rash, conjunctivitis, headache, joint pain, and muscle pain. Most people infected with Zika virus either have very mild symptoms or don't have any symptoms at all. Women who are infected with Zika virus during pregnancy have an increased risk of having a baby with certain birth defects, including microcephaly, regardless of whether they have symptoms of Zika.
What is microcephaly and why is it important?
Microcephaly is when a baby's head is smaller than expected compared to babies of the same age and sex. Babies with microcephaly often have smaller brains, and their brains might not have developed properly. Microcephaly is associated with many poor health outcomes, including feeding challenges, sleeping difficulties, motor impairment, vision and hearing abnormalities, and seizures. And many babies with microcephaly will have severe, lifelong health challenges.
Take us back to this time. What did you and other CDC experts do when you first heard about these babies with microcephaly in Brazil?
To address these reports of microcephaly coming from Brazil, CDC assembled experts in birth defects epidemiology, reproductive health, and the Zika virus. On January 15, 2016, CDC released a Health Alert Network advisory to warn pregnant women about the potential risks of travel to areas with Zika. And just a few days later, on January 19th, CDC released the first MMWR with interim clinical guidance for pregnant women with possible Zika virus infection. Just a few days after that, on January 22nd, CDC activated its Emergency Operations Center to coordinate the public health response to this outbreak. That same day, MMWR released the report we are discussing today.
What role did that report play in identifying Zika as a cause of birth defects?
That report really laid the groundwork for our surveillance and research efforts to identify the full impact of Zika virus infection during pregnancy. It sounded the alarm and really indicated to us that our work on Zika virus was just beginning.
What other types of studies have been done to better understand Zika as a cause of birth defects?
In early 2016, CDC rapidly established a surveillance network in collaboration with state, local, tribal, and territorial health departments to identify and monitor all pregnancies with laboratory evidence of possible Zika virus infection. CDC also collaborated with state and territorial health departments to implement rapid birth defect surveillance for microcephaly, brain abnormalities, and other serious birth defects that have been linked to Zika virus infection, regardless of the Zika virus testing results. These two surveillance systems each make unique contributions because not every pregnancy that's been exposed to Zika virus will be tested for Zika, and many pregnant women might not be tested during the brief time period when we can identify Zika virus infection.
What strategies have been recommended to prevent transmission of this virus?
Transmission of Zika virus can be prevented by preventing mosquito bites and sexual transmission of the virus. CDC continues to recommend that pregnant women avoid travel to any areas where there's risk of Zika because of the serious risk of birth defects. CDC also recommends that women and men who are planning to conceive in the near future consider waiting to conceive after traveling to areas with risk of Zika.
Tell us about the role that MMWR reports have played in this outbreak.
The MMWR has been critical to our efforts to rapidly disseminate new information as it's discovered. Little was known about Zika virus and particularly infection during pregnancy before the outbreak began. Through the MMWR, we have published reports about Zika virus in pregnant women and infants in the United States and released important clinical guidance for the evaluation and management of both pregnant women and infants with possible Zika virus infection. We continue to update this clinical guidance as we gather new information.
What are some of the lessons that have been learned from this outbreak and its response?
The Zika virus outbreak and emergency response highlighted the medical vulnerability of pregnant women and infants to emerging infections and other health threats, and reinforced the need to carefully monitor the health of these populations. It also demonstrated the importance of public health collaboration between different disciplines within the field, including maternal and child health, infectious disease, epidemiology, and vital statistics.
Dr. Honane, thank you for joining me today. MMWR is proud of its role in communicating critical findings of this investigation and response. For more information on this outbreak or to learn more about the latest in public health, visit cdc.gov/MMWR. Until next time, this is Dr. Sonia Rasmussen for Defining Moments in MMWR History.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
He seems sorry.
We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? What, did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hidden them well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun.
911, what is your emergency?
Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
Hi, I'm Tom Harbin, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
In its war on immigrants, the Trump administration has struck again.
Soy Javier Luengo Garrido, organizador de la ACLU de Massachusetts, y este es el Minuto de Libertades Civiles, con el abogado de ACLU, Bill Newman.
In mid-July, the Trump administration announced rules that, as a practical matter, if and when they take effect, would prohibit any migrant from Central America from even being considered for asylum in the United States, no matter how horrific the persecution, the violence, the extortion, no matter how horrifying the threats of rape and murder against that person and their family. The new rules would deny a migrant, a refugee, the right to apply for asylum in the United States unless that person has applied for asylum in a country neighboring his own or a country he or she has passed through. That Trump administration requirement would violate the law of the United States, which says those refugees, those migrants have a right to seek and apply for asylum. And it violates international law and treaties. And it's an utterly unmeetable requirement. There is, however, hope that this can be defeated. Congress, not the president, has the authority to enact laws. And so the ACLU and many other immigrant rights groups have sued to stop this rule from taking effect.
El Minuto de Libertades Civiles es posible gracias a ACLU, porque la libertad no puede defenderse a sí misma.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1970. That was the day the United Farm Workers, led by Cesar Chavez, signed their first union contract in California. It was a milestone victory for agricultural workers. Farm workers, often Mexican immigrants, had very strenuous working conditions. They worked long hours in the fields for extreme poverty wages. In the event that housing was provided, it was often unsanitary and of very poor quality. Filipino organizers sought to improve working conditions for agricultural workers. After the U.S. colonized the Philippines, many Filipinos were recruited to work on California farms. They began organizing as early as the 1930s, forming the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee. The Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee reached prominence by the 1950s. At the same time, Mexican-American Cesar Chavez, along with Dolores Huerta, founded the National Farm Workers Association to organize the Mexican workers who were increasingly dominating the labor force in the fields. The Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee went on strike against the grape growers near Delano, California. Their goal was to get a raise of 20 cents per hour. When the owners refused to negotiate, the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee reached out to Chavez. The two groups merged to create the United Farm Workers. The United Farm Workers Union was able to get the support of many in the public through a boycott of California grapes. While the boycott lasted some 5 years, grape growers received considerably negative press and suffered financially. As a result, on July 29, 1970, growers agreed to a contract with the United Farm Workers, the first such agreement in farm labor history. So the next time you're enjoying those tasty grapes, think about the workers and their brave efforts to unionize farm workers. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Well, we always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh, excuse me, it just refreshed and is now ticked up to 60 degrees Fahrenheit with an overnight low tonight of, looks like it'll be in the low 60s. We are currently under an active air quality alert because of the wildfire in Canyonville, just north and west of us. We will have sunny conditions. I think it's going to be covered with smoke. It is quite smoky as I gaze out on the sky currently. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour in a couple of hours. Light and variable out of the northwest currently. Overnight lows, once again, will be in the low 50s. The wind speed will be at 5 to 10 miles per hour out of the north-northwest. High tomorrow, the high today will be in the low 90s. High tomorrow in the low 90s. Grass pollen is moderate. The air quality index is moderate at 83 parts per million, but I suspect that is going to be much higher. And the daytime UV index is very high at 9. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 29.79 inches. Visibility is at 10 miles. And relative humidity is at 71%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased, and these people planted these purchased. Personal weather stations somewhere on their property. These people positively live around the world. London is 77 and sunny. Paris is 82 and sunny. Rome is 86 and fair. Kiev, 77 and fair. Kabul, 85 and fair. Hong Kong, 82, mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 84 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 56, partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 58, partly cloudy with a wind advisory. New York is 87 Fahrenheit, sunny with a heat advisory, so do take care. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. John Getty and Faith Ungu of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Singapore Prime Minister's estranged brother has thrown his support behind a newly formed opposition party in an intriguing twist ahead of elections expected to be held as soon as this year. In Facebook comments made late Sunday, Li Shen-yang said the ruling People's Action Party, otherwise known as PAP, led by his elder brother Li Shenlong and founded by his father Lee Kuan Yew, had lost its way. His comments come amid a bitter feud between the siblings over their late father's house and an election which some analysts say could be months away and must be held by early 2021. I wholeheartedly support the principles and values of the Progress Singapore Party, Shin Yang said in a post. Today's PAP is no longer the PAP of my father. It has lost its way. The PAP, which has ruled Singapore since its independence over half a century ago and never seen its vote share drop below 60%, did not respond to a request for comment because they'll usually cane you if you chew gum while walking on the sidewalk.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Gabrielle Terrell-Farber of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny was hospitalized late Sunday after suffering an acute allergic reaction, which one doctor said may have been the result of him being poisoned with an unknown chemical substance. Do you think? Navalny, 43, was rushed to the hospital from jail, where he is serving a 30-day sentence for violating tough protest laws a day after police in Moscow detained more than 1,500 people for an illegal demonstration for and by Navalny. His spokeswoman, Kira Yarmish, said Navalny had signs of an acute allergy with severe swelling of the face and skin redness. A doctor at the hospital treating him told the Interfax news agency that Navalny had been diagnosed with hives and that he was feeling better, just like all the others felt better. All evidence to the contrary. One doctor who has treated him in the past and was able to speak briefly with him and look at him through the crack of a door said she could not rule out that he had been poisoned. We cannot rule out that toxic damage to the skin and mucous membranes by an unknown chemical substance was inflicted with the help of a third party. Anastasia Valisleva, the doctor, wrote. Valisleva, who said Navalny had a rash on his upper body, skin lesions, and discharges from his eyes, called for samples of Navalny's bedsheet, skin, and hair to be tested for chemicals. She said that she found the fact that she had not been allowed to examine him properly suspicious, as well as we, I might add, in this reporter's comment, not just an opinion. The Moscow hospital where Navalny's spokesman said he was being treated could not be reached for comment because this is Vlad's Russia, after all. Separately, Navalny's lawyer, Olga Mikhailova, wrote on Sunday evening that doctors did not know what was wrong with her client, but that she deemed his symptoms strange, given that he had never suffered allergies in the past. Navalny suffered a serious chemical burn to his right eye in 2017. How convenient. During an assault, doctors were able to restore his sight and save the eye. He was jailed on Wednesday of this last week for 30 days for calling for Saturday's unauthorized march to protest against the exclusion of several opposition candidates from a local election later this year, which we reported on. And I hate to bring this up, but we jokingly made a wager about when the convenient poisonings would commence. Well, they have. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know that Netroots Radio is going to broadcast on. So do stay tuned, and we're going to meet up here tomorrow for Terrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie d'un novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de retendre. Les années passent, il est loin l'âge tendre, nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver.